Let me tell you something quietly unsettling about people who disappear without explanation. They slip away so quietly you don't notice until weeks later. They scroll through your life, but their own presence just fades. And here's the question that always lingers. Why? Why would someone choose to vanish when the world expects explanation for everything? It's easy to assume people who disappear quietly are avoidant or emotionally immature, but that's not the full picture. Beneath the surface, there's an entire psychology at play, one that speaks volumes about attachment, identity, and quiet rebellion against a culture obsessed with closure. See, for some people, disappearing isn't cruelty, it's clarity, it's control, it's the power to choose what the world doesn't get to know. Because whether we admit it or not, modern culture has created an unspoken rule. You owe people closure. You owe an explanation for leaving. You owe a goodbye that makes sense. It rewards announcement. It praises transparency. And yet, those who slip away quietly are often the ones who understand boundaries most clearly. They leave without needing to interrupt. They process before explaining. They choose silence before performing closure. Psychologists have found something fascinating. People who exit relationships quietly often score higher on traits like self-preservation, internal processing, and emotional autonomy. They tend to be less influenced by social expectations and external validation. In other words, they aren't trying to prove their decision is right. They're simply acting on it. And in a world drowning in explanations, that's rare. Because, let's be honest, most departures aren't just endings. They're performances. An unconscious audition for understanding. Every explanation, every apology, every "it's not you, it's me" says, "This is why I'm leaving. Do you accept it?" But when you disappear quietly, something shifts. You begin to detach your peace from others' comprehension. You stop crafting explanations. You start trusting your own knowing instead of needing external agreement. And that's the secret psychology behind many people who vanish. They crave authenticity in a space where everything feels scripted. They don't hate connection. They just can't find themselves in performed goodbyes anymore. For some, the decision not to announce their departure comes after a kind of emotional burnout. Maybe they once did explain everything until one day it stopped feeling honest. They realized that every time they tried to make someone understand, they felt invisible pressure to justify their own intuition. They weren't leaving anymore. They were defending, so they stopped. No announcement, just a slow fade from the spaces they once occupied. But here's what's often misunderstood. Disappearing doesn't mean not caring. It doesn't mean they're indifferent. It often means they care too much about honesty, about integrity, about protecting what's sacred between knowing you need to leave and needing others to understand why. There's a concept in psychology called avoidant attachment. It's the tendency to process emotional experiences internally rather than through external dialogue. When relationships become heavy, when conflict feels inevitable, they don't escalate or explain. They withdraw, and when you disappear, that sense of obligation fades. The relationship becomes private again, yours to end on your own terms without needing consensus. So people who vanish quietly are often guarding their right to leave. They keep their reasons untouchable, private, unquestioned. And maybe that's not coldness or cowardice. Maybe it's a quiet kind of freedom. Because think about it. When was the last time you wanted to leave something but felt trapped by the weight of explanation? When was the last time you stayed in a relationship, a job, a city longer than you should have? Because leaving without words felt impossible. That reflex, that need to justify your departure, is not natural. It's conditioned. It's the product of years of being taught that leaving requires permission, that boundaries need defense, that your intuition must be explained to be legitimate. And when someone steps outside that system, it can feel like betrayal, but it's also healing. They start rediscovering the simplicity of trusting themselves again. Leaving without explaining it, changing without announcing it, choosing without justifying it. In that space, something awakens. A kind of self-trust that doesn't need an audience. But not everyone who disappears is doing it from a place of peace. Some are driven by fear, the fear of conflict, of guilt, of being misunderstood. Modern culture has amplified a subtle form of anxiety around endings. It's the constant awareness that leaving will hurt someone, even when staying hurts you more. And for many, that's paralyzing. They worry that disappearing makes them the villain. They worry that silence will be interpreted as cruelty. So they stay longer than they should, explaining feelings that only get more complicated with every conversation. And ironically, sometimes the quietest departures belong to people with the loudest internal struggles. They're not at peace. They're overwhelmed. They just choose stillness instead of spectacle. There's a deep truth beneath that silence. In a world that constantly says, explain yourself, choosing to leave without words becomes a form of self-definition. It's saying, I exist beyond your need for closure. Not everything you experience is meant to be shared. Sometimes the most profound decisions in life, leaving, letting go, starting over, happen quietly, privately, without announcement. And when you've lived through enough endings that required no explanation, you start realizing that disappearing is not the same as abandoning. It's actually where authenticity is preserved, not performed. This is where the paradox lives. We're told that communication solves everything. Yet sometimes it complicates the only thing that's clear, that you need to leave. When you disappear quietly, you stop chasing understood departures and start trusting clean ones. You begin noticing which relationships were built on convenience and which were built on something deeper. That kind of clarity, raw and unannounced, feels heavier, truer, and infinitely more honest. And the people who vanish quietly, they live in that clarity. They make decisions that don't need applause. They honor endings without turning them into stories. And they let chapters close without needing the last word. Part of this is about identity security. Knowing who you are, even when nobody understands your choices. When you're grounded in your own truth, you don't need others to validate your departures. That's not arrogance, it's peace. And ironically, the same people who disappear often have the richest inner lives, but they save their truth for the few who earn access, not for everyone who demands explanation. Because real integrity to them isn't measured in goodbyes or closure. It's in being honest enough to leave when words would only delay the inevitable. These are the people who trust their intuition deeply, who process constantly, and who understand quietly that sometimes love means letting go without making someone watch you leave. They don't need the world to understand their exits. They just need to honor them. And maybe, just maybe, in a world so desperate for explanation, their silence isn't weakness. It's wisdom, a reminder that not everything meaningful needs to be justified, that sometimes the most authentic thing you can do is leave when staying would be a performance. You know what's fascinating? The longer someone stays gone, the more clarity replaces confusion. In the beginning, disappearing feels disorienting. There's guilt, anxiety, fear that you've made a mistake. But over time, something changes. The noise quiets. The obligations fade, and what's left is just you. Distance becomes vision. Silence becomes knowing. Absence becomes presence with yourself. It's as if stepping away from everyone else allows you to finally hear your own voice again. Because when you're no longer managing everyone's feelings about your choices, you start living from your center instead of your edges. There's a quiet beauty in existing without needing to explain yourself. You're not defending your boundaries. You're not justifying your intuition. You're just there, fully committed to the life you're building in the quiet. And that's something performed goodbyes rarely allow. But the psychology behind this goes deeper than preference. It's rooted in how we process self-worth. Every time we explain our departures and seek understanding, we're unconsciously asking for permission. We're saying, is it okay that I'm leaving? Do you agree this is the right choice? Over time, we begin to crave that validation. We start thinking our decisions only matter if others comprehend them. Now imagine someone who resists that loop. Someone who deliberately chooses to trust themselves without consensus. That's not detachment, that's self-authority. It takes profound self-awareness to leave without needing anyone's blessing. People who disappear quietly often have what psychologists call an internal locus of control. Their sense of rightness comes from within, not from external approval. They don't need others to validate their exits to believe they made the right choice. And here's what's even more interesting. Studies on relationship dissolution show that people who process endings privately often experience less prolonged emotional distress than those who seek external closure. Because when your sense of completion is internal, it becomes solid, it becomes real. You're no longer waiting for someone else to grant you permission to move on. You're living in the truth you've already accepted. And maybe that's the real freedom, to stay whole in a world that demands you fragment yourself for everyone else's understanding. But silence around leaving doesn't always mean serenity. Sometimes it hides exhaustion. For many, relationships became spaces where they once sought belonging but ended up feeling drained. There's a subtle emotional fatigue that comes from constantly explaining yourself, from defending boundaries that should be respected without justification. You start questioning your own clarity. You start wondering if you're wrong, even when you know you're not. And eventually, some people decide to leave, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. They realize they don't owe the world a performance of their pain. They don't owe an explanation for protecting their peace. And they don't need to keep proving they're making the right choice. That's one of the quiet truths of modern relationships. We've confused explanation with respect. We assume that to honor someone, we must make them understand why we're leaving. But real respect sometimes looks like trusting that your departure is enough, that your no doesn't need a thesis defense, that you can honor what was without needing to justify what isn't anymore. And maybe that's what those who disappear understand best. They know that closure is personal. It's something you give yourself, not something you extract from others. Because when you stop waiting for someone to grant you permission to leave, you start living in the integrity of your own choices. You stop broadcasting every boundary. You start simply living them. And that's something profoundly rare in a culture addicted to announcement. Of course, it's not always easy. There are moments of doubt, moments of wondering if disappearing makes you a bad person, moments of missing what was even though you know it had to end. But with time, you start noticing something beautiful. Your peace doesn't disappear when nobody's watching. It's still there, steady, like the quiet hum of knowing you made the choice that was true for you. And maybe that's what real integrity looks like. Not the loud declaration of your reasons online, but the calm certainty of your choices in private. When psychologists talk about authentic living, they emphasize something called congruence, the alignment between who you are inside and what you do in the world. But in the age of over-explanation, that alignment constantly distorts. You begin to live as a version of yourself that's always defending, always justifying, always performing your right to exist as you are. So when someone chooses to disappear, it might be their way of staying congruent, of preserving that fragile integrity between their inner knowing and their outer choices. They don't need everyone to witness their reasons, to trust that they're real. They don't need to announce every boundary to honor it. They live their truth fully and quietly. And here's the paradox. Those who leave the quietest often feel their decisions most intensely. They're not detached from the weight of departure. They absorb it completely, process it privately, and carry it with grace. The way intuition speaks before words can explain it. The way knowing settles in your body before your mind catches up. The way silence holds more truth than any explanation could contain. They are present with their choices. And presence is the rarest form of integrity in a world built on performance. But sometimes that very integrity makes them misunderstood. People might label them cold, avoidant, even cruel. Yet if you look closer, their silence isn't emptiness, it's fullness. It's the depth that comes from no longer needing to defend your truth, to feel certain of it. There's a quiet confidence that comes from not needing everyone to understand your choices, just honoring them yourself. And that's what people who disappear quietly understand best. They know that not every ending is meant for public consumption, that some goodbyes are too sacred to perform. Because once you turn your departure into content, it stops being yours. It belongs to interpretation, to judgment, to other people's narratives about who you are. And maybe some endings are too honest for that. So the next time someone disappears from your life without explanation, don't assume they're running from you. Maybe they're walking toward themselves. Maybe they're not lost. Maybe they're finally finding clarity. Maybe they're not hiding. Maybe they're healing in the only way that feels true. And maybe, just maybe, their silence isn't rejection, it's reverence. The quiet, unhurried act of choosing integrity over explanation, peace over performance, truth over approval. Because in the end, we're not meant to justify every boundary we set just because others don't understand them. We're not meant to perform closure for people who confuse explanation with respect. We're not meant to stay in spaces that no longer fit us simply because leaving quietly feels uncomfortable for others. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is disappear. Not because you're avoiding, but because you're finally honoring. And the people who disappear quietly, they remind us of that. Every silent exit, every unanswered question, every boundary held without defense. They remind us that leaving doesn't always need a reason that satisfies someone else. Sometimes it just needs to be true.